The Cruise Bible, the authoritative Berlitz complete guide to cruising and cruise ships, has for years said this line has the very best ships in the world, but almost no cruisers outside its home country have ever heard of it, even though it's 50% owned and operated by the Royal Caribbean line that everyone's heard of. So I decided to book myself on the line to see if they were better and if I would recommend that cruisers like you consider taking a huge risk and cruising on a line that you've never heard of. If you're new here, welcome aboard. I'm Gary Bembridge, helping make it fun and easy for you to discover, plan and enjoy unforgettable cruise vacations. The line is Germany's Hapag-Lloyd. They have 5 ships at the time of recording, 2 classic cruise and 3 expedition ships. Now, as an English speaker, there were only 2 ships in the fleet that I could even choose from, because those are the only ones that operate as international, which means bilingual German and English speaking crew and a bilingual program. This is Europa 2, a classic cruise ship, and Hanseatic Inspiration, an expedition ship. I chose the 230 passenger Hanseatic Inspiration expedition ship because I wanted to go to Greenland and the Canadian Arctic, so I married those 2 things together. Now, as the cruise approached, I was increasingly concerned that I would be made to feel like a second-class citizen, with us English speakers less accommodated. And I also worried, in fact, that I would be the only English speaker on board and kind of feel, therefore, a lot isolated. I soon discovered that going on Hapag-Lloyd does mean that could be a risk, because the crew told me during the cruise that the number of English speakers varies dramatically cruise by cruise. On my cruise, in the end, there were actually 25 English speakers, so about 10%, but 21 were traveling in one group on a tour via the UK Noble Caledonian tour operator, and they did tend to stick together. Now, because there were so many of us, though, some English language events were actually arranged. So, for example, the muster drill, the daily briefing, and all the enrichment talks were done for us in English. However, I discovered when there are only a handful of English speakers, everything is actually just done in German, and a live translation is given via earpieces. Now, I think that would have been pretty challenging and tiring. All of the key announcements, by the way, were made by the captain or the cruise director, and these were done in both languages with, I think, a good equal measure of content. All the major events, though, like the captain's welcome and the farewell parties, were also done in both languages. You know, they'd switch between the 2. Now, on board, everybody, passengers and crew, though, would always speak to me in German first. But because it's a small ship, over time, some of the crew, mostly in the dining room, started to recognize I was English speaking, and so they kind of adapted. So they would speak to me in English first, they would hand me an English version of the menu without me kind of asking for that. One promising thing, though, that I did find, that the German passengers were mostly bilingual, and they seemed very comfortable and very happy to talk in English. So that did make it a little bit easier to kind of get to know a little bit and chat to passengers. Though it did have some limitations that are really important that I will come to later. An English language daily program was available every day, and there was an English setting on the TV, so then all the information in that format was then done in English. The entertainment itself was designed to be largely kind of neutral and not very language dependent, so there was a pianist, maybe a song and dance event. Though, to be honest with you, I did find it a little bit draining and isolating, and I did feel that I was actually missing out, because one of the things that I realized makes cruising is the upside of those informal chats, sharing experiences, kind of meeting passengers and actually kind of overhearing and kind of listening to other people's conversations. You pick up so much stuff. At dinner, English and German speakers were never put together. I only ever ended up socializing in reality with the English speakers, but because most were in that group, they would kind of hang out together, so they were kind of like a little bubble anyway. I did sometimes feel that I was missing out. So, for example, on a Zodiac ride around the Crocker Bay Glacier in the Canadian Arctic, I was the only English speaker on the Zodiac. There was about 10 people on that. So the driver and guide spoke, I would say, probably 98% of the time in German, because people were asking her questions. They were discussing things amongst each other. And so I kind of got a little bit left out. I felt a little bit isolated, because kind of I knew there was so much going on that I was missing out, and questions that people were asking that I was not really learning and being a part of. So it did over time get a little bit training out on the landings as well, because when we got to the shore, they had to repeat the briefing as we landed in both languages. Then the guides that you'd come across on the various landing sites would again have to explain things in English and then in German. Now, I was actually traveling solo on this trip, and I did think that it probably made me feel a little bit more isolated than when I'm on other lines as solo, because I decided that key learning if you're going on Hapag-Lloyd or any foreign line is, even though they do things bilingual, it would have been a much better idea to go with a traveling companion, or even better with a group of friends, because then you create your own kind of social interaction. Many of those issues then kind of float away. I would say though that despite all that, Hapag-Lloyd didn't make me as an English speaker feel like a second-class citizen or as an afterthought. I did feel that they tried really hard to make me feel included, to make us English speakers feel welcome. It was more that over time, the bilingual everything and missing out on those informal interactions with guests did make me feel I was kind of missing out on a fuller cruising experience. However, there was another thing that I was really worried about before going, that I want to explain how that went, because it was rather different to what I'd actually expected. Now, Hapag-Lloyd is priced around the kind of seaborne, silver sea, crystal cruises levels, and I was really concerned if I would find that it was really worth it all. You know, the design, the facilities, the program, the level of service, the inclusions, particularly because I was worried that it's a very German-focused line, so would many of these things feel a little bit foreign, a little bit unfamiliar to those of us like me that are used to more American-rooted lines? Now, there are several things that I really want to talk about that did in fact feel different. The first of these is the crew. There was a noticeable difference on Hapag-Lloyd versus those other kind of more American lines, and pretty much in fact any other line I've been on. They had mostly European and specifically German crew in pretty much every single passenger-facing role. Although the cabin stewards and some of the barmen, and of course much of the kind of sailors as they were from more traditional cruise crew countries. But overall, it was mostly a European crew. I did find the service that was really good, and it actually wasn't what I'd expected stereotypical German service to be. You know, I thought it would be quite formal, but it was more informal, it was much more jokey, and I guess I just really expected German service was going to be kind of very formal and very kind of reserved. The second difference was it was way more family friendly than any luxury line that I've been on. I know they have amazing family cabins on Europa too. These are kind of connected cabins with bunk beds, toys, lots of family features. And on my ship, there were multiple occupancy cabins. And some, like the large cabin that I stayed in, had a really separate bedroom, lounge, and then a separate lounge area with a sofa bed for the kids. They ran a really big, active Young Explorers program on this trip with events in the day, in the ports, and in the evening. The third difference was that I found that the ship design was different. Now, I've already mentioned it's a small ship, so I knew there would, of course, not be lots of venues and facilities, but it was, in fact, comparable with any other kind of luxury small ship lines. You know, it had a large lounge for talks and shows, a bar for kind of live music lounge. There's the main dining room, there's a buffet restaurant, a specialty restaurant, a fitness center, spa, small shop, and of course your pool deck with hot tubs. The big difference though was the look and the decor. It was more, I guess, Scandinavian in feel. The closest cruise line I've been on is Viking, which of course is actually a Scandinavian-based line. There was lots of light woods, it was very modern, very crisp design. So I think people who are more used to the kind of the darker, richer wood kind of design tones of those US focus lines would actually find this quite a stark difference. For me, it was. I felt it was very different to the feel of all those other ships in kind of the comparable luxury space. I did, though, actually really like this kind of fresh feel. The cabins, though, I think some people might find them a little bit stark, a little bit kind of harsh in many ways. I didn't. They did also have a smoking room, which was called the Invisible Lounge, which is not something you find these days on most lines that I'm used to. And I know that on Europa too, they have an even bigger smoking lounge, which I think is called Collins. Now, there is another issue that I do need to talk about, because this is another one that I was worried about. And this is actually, in fact, the most asked about area that I got from followers when I was away on the cruise itself. That was, of course, about food. Now, I know from the experience of going on French lines like Ponant or across Europe that the menus and food on those lines are very French focused. So I was worried a little bit whether it would be overly German on Hapag-Lloyd, but I realized actually beyond the stereotype of kind of sausages, bratwurst, sauerkraut, schnitzel, pretzels, black forest cake and apple strudel, I wasn't really sure what it would actually mean. Would it just be kind of that stereotypical? I actually found instead that while there was of course some German influence in the menu most days, there might be a sausage station on the buffet. One day we had a sausage and beer deck party and so on. But the cuisine overall was much more international and actually was themed to different regions on most days: Italian, Spanish, French, Latin American, Japanese, and so on. I must say I was really impressed with the food because I don't think of Germany as being kind of a culinary center of the world, but the food was great. The main dining room was really good, it had really attentive service. The menu at dinner would be quite an elaborate event. If you're a amuse bouche, you'd have a starter, a soup, sorbet, main course, you'd have dessert or cheese. It had items of the day, which would be different every day, and then they had classics like many cruise lines, salmon, that kind of stuff every day. They also have special ed restaurants on Hapag-Lloyd, and they differ between classic and the expedition ships. Now on Hanseatic Inspiration, I had one which was called Nikkei. It's a really unusual Japanese-Peruvian crossover. Interesting food, really good again. By the way, beer and wine were included at lunch and dinner, and they did have a very bizarre thing where they charged for water at meals, which I believe is kind of a running issue that cruisers have with Hapag-Lloyd. I find it just really kind of strange. Now, in terms of other inclusions, it was more of a pay-as-you-go mindset, which is kind of different to what I'm used to. So included in the fare was, like, for example, an hour of internet each day. But then I could buy add-ons, but it was by kind of megabyte. It wasn't kind of all you can eat, if you like, all you can consume Wi-Fi. There was no drinks package. It was a charge per drink. But there was almost no upselling. On this trip I was on, they had a photo and video package, which cost like from 345 euros upwards. So that was kind of quite a big item. Now, before I talk about the next issue, I just want to have a quick plug here. If you're enjoying my content, why not consider becoming a patron? Because you can get exclusive bonus content, including live update videos while I'm on trips like this one that I did on Hapag-Lloyd. You get eBooks, unlimited access to ask questions. Visit patreon.com/tipsfortravelers to find out more. But anyway, with that plug over, let's get back to the real question, which is, would I go back on Hapag-Lloyd? I felt that while the ships were beautiful and the service good, I'm not sure they're way better than some of the others, as the guide would suggest. And I think I would probably only go back on Hapag-Lloyd based on the expedition itinerary, or perhaps if I was, learning German and wanted to practice my German, because I can go on the same kind of itineraries on the classic cruises, in the Mediterranean, Caribbean, Alaska, and so on. I can go on a line where I'm going to feel a little bit less kind of at sea, as it were, on those itineraries. So very, very much itinerary driven. So my decision would be heavily driven by itinerary. One of the most telling things, I guess, was I really want to go back to Antarctica, and I could find a similar itinerary on Hapag-Lloyd and on Silversea, which includes South Georgia. But I booked Silversea over Hapag-Lloyd just because I really felt I would just be so much more immersed because of the language thing. But they were impressive. And if you want to push yourself out of a comfort zone and you have the budget, I do think they are really worth a try. Now, if you want to know much more, by the way, about cruising Greenland that I did, including the incredible shock that I had on the first day on my Hapag-Lloyd trip, join me over in this video where I talk about that. I hope I see you over there right now.